the storm's gift. The rain hammered the forest canopy like 1,000 angry drums, each drop finding its way through the thick pine needles to strike the moss-covered ground below. Jake Morrison pulled his weathered jacket tighter around his shoulders and squinted through the downpour. 23 years of wilderness living had taught him to read the moods of the mountains, and tonight the Pacific Northwest was furious. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the towering Douglas firs that surrounded his remote cabin. The thunder that followed shook the ground beneath his boots. Jake had seen storms before, but this one carried a violence that made even the wildlife seek deeper shelter. He should have been inside, tending to his fire and waiting for the tempest to pass. Instead, something pulled him toward the old logging trail that wound through the heart of the forest. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the same sixth sense that had kept him alive during 3 tours as an army medic in Afghanistan. Whatever it was, Jake trusted it completely. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness as he made his way along the familiar path, his boots finding purchase on the slippery rocks and fallen logs. The wind howled through the trees like a living thing, bending the massive trunks until they groaned in protest. Jake pressed forward, following the trail deeper into the wilderness. Something was wrong out here. He could feel it in his bones, the way animals sense earthquakes before they strike. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm or the forest. A soft moan, barely audible above the chaos of wind and rain. Jake stopped, straining his ears. There it was again, coming from somewhere off the main trail. He pushed through a curtain of wet ferns and low-hanging branches, his flashlight sweeping the ground. The beam caught something that made his heart skip. A flash of bright yellow fabric against the dark earth. Rain gear. Expensive rain gear. Victoria Sterling lay crumpled at the base of a massive cedar tree, her designer hiking boots twisted at an unnatural angle. Her face was pale as moonlight, lips tinged blue with cold. A deep gash above her left temple leaked blood that the rain immediately washed away. She wasn't moving. Jake dropped to his knees beside her, his medical training taking over. 2 fingers pressed against her neck found a pulse, weak but steady. Her breathing was shallow, irregular. Hypothermia was setting in fast. He needed to get her warm and dry, and he needed to do it now. "Hey, can you hear me?" he called over the storm, gently tapping her cheek. No response. Her skin felt like ice beneath his rough fingers. Jake's cabin was half a mile away through treacherous terrain. Carrying an unconscious person through this storm would be dangerous, but leaving her here meant certain death. He didn't hesitate. In one smooth motion, he scooped Victoria into his arms, surprised by how light she felt despite her tall frame. The journey back to his cabin became a nightmare of slipping rocks and grabbing branches. Every step was a battle against the wind that seemed determined to knock them both to the ground. Victoria's head lolled against his shoulder, her expensive hiking jacket soaked through and useless against the cold. Jake's muscles burned as he climbed the steep slope toward home. His breath came in sharp bursts, visible in the frigid air. Lightning continued to tear the sky apart, each flash revealing the path ahead for brief, precious moments. Rain drove into his eyes, making it nearly impossible to see. By the time he reached his cabin, Jake's legs were shaking with exhaustion. He kicked open the heavy wooden door and stumbled inside, immediately hit by the blessed warmth of the wood-burning stove he'd left burning. The contrast between the storm's fury and his cabin's peaceful interior was startling. Jake laid Victoria carefully on his bed, then immediately began stripping away her wet clothes. Modesty was a luxury he couldn't afford when someone was dying of exposure. Her hiking gear was top of the line, he noticed. Arc'teryx jacket, Patagonia base layers, boots that probably cost more than most people made in a month. This wasn't some weekend warrior who'd gotten in over her head. He wrapped her in thick wool blankets, then set about examining her injuries. The head wound looked worse than it was, bleeding freely but not deep enough to require stitches. Her ankle was swollen, possibly sprained from a fall. Worst of all was the hypothermia. Her core temperature was dangerously low. Jake stoked the fire until it roared, filling the small cabin with dancing light and precious heat. He heated water in a large pot, adding pine needle tea for its vitamin C and warming properties. Every few minutes, he checked Victoria's pulse and breathing, willing her to fight. Hours passed. Jake sat beside the bed, monitoring his unexpected, patient while the storm raged outside. Gradually, color began to return to her cheeks. Her breathing deepened, became more regular. The shivering that had racked her body when he first brought her inside finally stopped. As dawn approached and the storm began to weaken, Victoria's eyes fluttered open. They were the color of storm clouds, gray-green and surprisingly alert for someone who'd nearly died in the night. "Where?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're safe," Jake said quietly. "You were caught in the storm. I found you and brought you to my cabin." Victoria tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillows. "My head. You took a nasty fall. Hit your head on something. You've been unconscious for about 6 hours." She stared at him, taking in his weather-beaten face, the gray threading through his dark beard, the gentle brown eyes that had seen too much. "Who are you?" "Jake Morrison. I live here." He gestured around the rustic cabin with its rough-hewn walls and simple furnishings. "What's your name?" Victoria hesitated for just a moment. "Tori," she said finally. "Tori Wilson." Jake noticed the pause but didn't comment. People came to the wilderness for all kinds of reasons, and many of them preferred to leave their real names behind. "Well, Tori Wilson, you're lucky to be alive. That storm could have killed you." She looked around the cabin, taking in the cast-iron stove, the shelves lined with mason jars full of dried herbs, the hand-carved furniture that spoke of a man who built things to last. It was like stepping back in time, into a world where life moved at the pace of seasons rather than seconds. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked. 8 years, Jake replied, checking the bandage on her forehead. "Came out here after. I got out of the army. Needed some peace and quiet." Victoria studied his face, noting the careful way he moved, the gentleness in his strong hands. This man had saved her life, brought her into his home, cared for her without asking for anything in return. In her world, people always wanted something. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving me." Jake shrugged, embarrassed by her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. But Victoria knew better. In her experience, very few people would risk their own safety for a stranger. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her back toward sleep. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. Outside, the storm was finally breaking. Shafts of golden sunlight began to pierce the clouds, and the rain gentled to a whisper against the cabin's windows. Jake settled into his chair beside the bed, keeping watch over the mysterious woman who had literally fallen into his life. Neither of them could have imagined how this chance encounter would change everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and what it meant to truly live. Hearts in the wilderness. 3 days had passed since the storm, and Victoria was finally strong enough to sit up without the world spinning around her. Her ankle, wrapped in one of Jake's clean flannel shirts, was healing well. The gash on her forehead had scabbed over, leaving what would probably be a small scar. She found herself oddly proud of it, this mark of survival. Jake had been nothing but kind, bringing her herbal teas that tasted of pine and honey, wild mushroom soup that somehow filled her with more warmth than any 5-star meal ever had. He moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, never making her feel like a burden despite the way she'd upended his solitary life. "You don't have to take care of me," she said, as he brought her breakfast on a hand-carved wooden tray. "I could probably make it back to town today." Jake raised an eyebrow. Town's 40 miles away through some of the roughest terrain in the state. Your ankle's not ready for that kind of hike. Victoria looked down at her wrapped foot. The truth was, she didn't want to leave. For the first time in her 28 years, she was experiencing what it felt like to simply exist without schedules, without expectations, without the crushing weight of obligation. "Tell me about your life out here," she said, watching Jake settle into his chair with his own cup of coffee. "Not much to tell. I grow what I can, hunt what I need, trade with folks in town a few times a year for supplies." He gestured toward, the shelves lined with preserved foods and medicinal herbs. "It's a simple life, but it's mine." Victoria found herself fascinated by this man who had chosen to step away from the world entirely. In her universe, people clawed and fought for more money, more power, more recognition. Jake had deliberately chosen less, and somehow seemed infinitely richer for it. "Don't you get lonely?" she asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "Sometimes, but I prefer my own company to most people's." He looked up at her. "What about you? What were you doing out there in the storm?" The question she'd been dreading. Victoria wrapped her hands around her warm mug, buying time. "I was hiking. Got turned around when the weather changed." "Hiking alone? In gear like that?" Jake's voice was gentle, but she could hear the skepticism. "That equipment cost more than most people make in a year. And your hands—" He reached over and turned one of her palms up. "These aren't the hands of someone who spends much time outdoors." Victoria looked down at her soft, manicured fingers. Even after 3 days in the wilderness, they still looked like they belonged in a boardroom rather than wrapped around a hiking pole. "I'm not much of an outdoors woman," she admitted. "I just needed to get away from everything." Jake nodded, understanding flickering in his brown eyes. "Running from something?" "From everyone, actually." The words spilled out before she could stop them. "My family, my fiancé, my entire life. They had it all planned out for me, every detail, and I just couldn't breathe anymore." She expected him to press for details, to pry the way people always did when they sensed weakness. Instead, Jake simply nodded. "Sometimes running away is the only way to find yourself," he said quietly. That afternoon, Jake taught her how to identify edible plants in the forest around his cabin. Victoria found herself laughing as she mistook poisonous berries for safe ones 3 times in a row. "City girl," Jake teased, his rare smile transforming his entire face. "Guilty as charged," Victoria replied, surprised by how comfortable she felt with this gentle mockery. In her world, everyone was always so careful, so deferential. Jake treated her like a person, not a title or a bank account. They spent the evening by the fire, Victoria wrapped in blankets while Jake whittled a new handle for his axe. The silence between them was comfortable, companionable. Victoria watched. His strong, scarred hands shaped the wood with patient precision. "You're good at that," she observed. "Had plenty of practice. Out here, if something breaks, you fix it yourself or do without." Victoria thought about her own life, where broken things were simply replaced, where problems were solved by throwing money at them until they disappeared. "I wouldn't know where to begin." "I could teach you," Jake offered, then seemed surprised by his own words. "I'd like that," Victoria said softly. The next morning brought devastating news. Jake returned from his weekly trip to the trading post in the valley with a newspaper tucked under his arm. His face was grim as he approached the cabin. "Tori," he said carefully, "I think we need to talk." Victoria's blood turned to ice. The headline was visible even from across the room. "Sterling Iris still missing. Family offers $10 million reward." Her carefully constructed lie crumbled as Jake spread the newspaper on the small table. There was her face, looking back at them from the front page. Not the wind-blown, scar-faced woman who'd been sharing his cabin, but the polished, perfect version that attended charity galas and board meetings. Victoria Sterling, Jake read aloud, daughter of hotel magnate Harrison Sterling, disappeared 3 days before her wedding to petroleum heir Marcus Blackwood. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. $10 million reward for information leading to her safe return. Victoria couldn't meet his eyes. Jake, I can explain. You're a billionaire. His voice was flat, emotionless. My family is wealthy, yes, but billionaire, he repeated. And you're engaged to be married. The word engaged hit her like a physical blow. I was engaged. I ran away, remember? I told you I was running from my family, from a life I didn't want. Jake stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Do you have any idea what your disappearance has done? There are search teams combing these mountains. Helicopters flying over every day. The whole state's looking for you. I didn't ask them to look. Victoria's voice rose. I left because I wanted to disappear, and stumbled into my life instead. Jake's words were quiet, but they cut deep. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm cabin. Is that what you think? That I used you? Jake turned to face her, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. I think you're a woman who's never had to live in the real world, who doesn't understand that actions have consequences beyond your own comfort. The accusation stung because part of it was true. Victoria had lived a sheltered life, insulated from hardship by wealth and privilege. But these past few days with Jake had shown her something different, something real. You're right, she said, quietly. I have been sheltered. I've never had to worry about money or where my next meal was coming from. But that doesn't mean my feelings aren't real. What I've found here with you, it's the first genuine thing in my life. Jake's expression softened slightly. Victoria. My name is Tori, she interrupted. Out here, with you, I'm just Tori. Not the sterling heiress, not Marcus's fiancée, not my father's perfect daughter. Just a woman who found something worth staying for. They stared at each other across the small cabin. Two people from completely different worlds who had somehow found something precious in the space between them. Your family thinks you're dead, Jake said finally. Your father's in the hospital. Heart attack from the stress. Victoria's face went white. What? It's all in the paper. He collapsed 2 days after you disappeared. Guilt crashed over her, like a cold wave. Whatever her father's flaws, whatever cage he'd tried to build around her life, he loved her. The thought of him lying in a hospital bed, believing she was dead, was unbearable. I have to call them, she whispered. Jake nodded, toward his radio. I can reach the ranger station. They can patch you through. The conversation with her family was exactly as difficult as Victoria had feared. Her mother sobbed. Her father, speaking from his hospital bed, alternated between relief and fury. Marcus demanded she return immediately. The entire Sterling Empire was in chaos without her. After she hung up, Victoria sat in silence for a long time. Jake busied himself around the cabin, giving her space to think. They're sending a helicopter, she said finally. It'll be here in 2 hours. Jake nodded without turning around. Probably for the best. Is it? Victoria stood, moving to stand behind him. Jake, look at me. He turned, and she saw her own heartbreak reflected in his eyes. These past few days have been the happiest of my life, she said. I know that sounds crazy, given that I nearly died, but it's true. For the first time ever, I felt like myself, like the person I was meant to be. You have a life waiting for you, Jake said. Responsibilities. People who love you, but not the way you could love me. The words hung between them, brave and vulnerable. Jake reached up, cupping her face gently in his calloused hands. Victoria, you deserve a life that doesn't require you to give up everything else. You think you do now. But this isn't a vacation from your real life. This is my life. Every day. For the rest of my days. No hot showers, no restaurants, no shopping, no servants. Just me and the mountains and whatever we can build together. Victoria covered his hands with hers. I want to try. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance made them both look up. Their time was ending. If you change your mind, Jake said quietly, if you decide this world is too small for you, I understand. But I can't watch you realize it and leave. Again. So if you go now, don't come back unless you're sure. Victoria stood on her toes and kissed him, putting all her love and hope and desperation into that single moment of connection. When they broke apart, the helicopter was visible through the trees. I'll be back, she promised. I have some things to take care of first, but I'll be back. Jake helped her gather her things as the helicopter landed in the clearing behind his cabin. Men in suits emerged, along with paramedics and what looked like half her father's security team. Miss Sterling! The lead agent rushed toward them. Thank God you're alive! Victoria barely heard him. She was looking back at Jake, memorizing his face, the way he stood straight and strong despite the pain she could see in his eyes. 2 weeks, she called out over the noise of the rotors. Give me 2 weeks to fix everything and then I'm coming. Home. Jake raised his hand in farewell, and then she was being helped into the helicopter, rising up and away from the only place she'd ever truly belonged. As the forest fell away beneath them, Victoria pressed her hand to the window and made a silent promise. She would find a way back to him, back to the life they could build together. Some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant walking away from everything she'd ever known. Below them, Jake stood in his clearing until the helicopter disappeared entirely. Then he went back inside his cabin to wait and hope that love would be enough to bring her home.